Duty ethics. Duty ethics is concerned with setting out what we ought to do if we take our status of moral agents seriously. So it flows on a little bit from virtue ethics in the sense that we are still talking about ways that we ought to behave. And it's based on the idea of deontology. So the philosophy of deontology. So the morality of any action should be based on whether that action itself is right or wrong under a series of rules. Again, rather than based on the consequences of that action. So duty ethics differs from virtue ethics because virtue ethics involves a universal set of principles. Duty ethics, again, as its name implies, is rule-based. And this is where we begin to see professional applications. So depending on where you work, you will be working under a set of rules. So do you adhere to the rules of any particular circumstance or situation, or think more about the consequences of your actions? So it's a little bit like, a good analogy, I think, is playing a game or playing sport. In order to win, you could cheat or you could play by the rules. So that's duty ethics in a nutshell. Do we achieve our desired ethical outcome by playing by the rules, or do we focus on the consequences? And sometimes that might mean breaking those rules. So there are moral obligations that we are bound by, and these obligations need to motivate our behavior. They're the things that should motivate our behavior, those rules. Some choices are simply wrong. We should not break those rules because they fail to reflect our duty to behave in a certain way. So duty ethics argues that the end does not always justify the means. Following the rules is more important than the outcome. Duty ethics implies that the end does not justify the means. And that's a really simple way of understanding how duty ethics operates. Now, duty ethics works well in theory and in principle, but like virtue ethics, in terms of practice, it might be seen, or you might see it, as being a little too rigid and inflexible in terms of the requirement to follow rules or place ethical rules above the outcome. Now, people who subscribe to duty ethics and ethical philosophers do recognize this and argue that we need some flexibility in how to balance these duties with the consequences of our actions in our daily lives. So I think it's important to remember that in relation to duty ethics, context does matter. To give you an example, as a journalist, you may be comfortable going through someone's mobile phone if you thought doing so might reveal corruption. Now, that in itself is a very complex issue. You have to make a decision about what is the public's interest here and what are the boundaries around which you might go through someone's mobile phone. However, you would never go through your partner's phone in your everyday life, because that would be grounds for divorce, grounds for breaking up, grounds for a whole series of problems. And there's probably very little or no public interest benefit there. There might be personal interest, but there's no public interest. So we might behave in one way as a professional and behave in another way as an individual citizen. So context does count in relation to duty ethics.